So, the Supreme Court of the United States of America is the highest court in the nation. Remember, it's part of the federal judiciary or the United States judiciary. So, don't be confusing the federal courts or the U.S. courts with the state courts or county courts within the state. These two systems operate side by side. The same way that we have a Congress for the nation, but we also have a state government, state legislature, while we also have local city councils. All of these operate side by side, but in the end, the United States court system is the one that has the final say on all legal matters. For most cases, the vast majority of legal cases, the Supreme Court will not get involved. It will only get involved if cases involve a constitutional question. For example, whether someone's rights have been violated. When I say rights, I mean either the voting rights or personal protection, privacy, those amendments that we call the Bill of Rights, or equal protection. For example, maybe a state was not treating all of its citizens equally, then the federal government, the United States Supreme Court, might get involved. It doesn't have to. They pick and choose what cases they want to rule on, and they do that so that they set a precedent. They set the ruling so that from that point on, everyone will look at that court case. So remember, we're talking about the federal government, and at the top of the federal courts would be the Supreme Court. We mentioned there are about 900 federal judges, but the 9 that make up the Supreme Court have the final say. And there are 94 lower courts with 13 appeals courts. So there are many courts in the federal system, but this discussion is about the top of the pyramid, the U.S. Supreme Court. And again, we find the creation of the Supreme Court in Article 3 of the Constitution. It is the only court that's mentioned by name and given a name. It does not give many details. It leaves that up to the Congress. The Congress can fill in some of the details on the Supreme Court, and in fact, all the details on the lower federal courts. So these 9 members, now again, it doesn't say in the Constitution there'll be 9 members, but since around 1869, we've had 9 members of the Supreme Court. Congress sets the number of people on the Supreme Court, and it's been 9 since right after the Civil War. But the Supreme Court is the top of the federal court system. There are 9 justices. Well, perhaps it's better to say 8 associate justices and 1 chief justice. But the Supreme Court's main job would be to interpret the Constitution. If laws are passed by states or by the federal government, the Supreme Court will look at those laws, if those laws are challenged in court, and they will say, this law passed by the state of Missouri does not really fit with the Constitution. So therefore, that law is unconstitutional. Let me give you an example. Let's say the state of Missouri says that we're tired of having loud music being played in our state, so everyone has to turn off their music and go to bed at quiet hours, basically across Missouri from 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. Well, people might challenge that law and say, well, we have a right to freedom of expression and speech. We want to listen to our radio. We want to dance in the middle of the night. The Supreme Court would look at that law and say, yeah, that law violates the amendments to the Constitution of free speech and free expression. So then that Missouri law would be unconstitutional. So they look at laws that have been passed by states and by the federal government, and they decide whether or not those laws fit within the Constitution. So on all of these major issues of our day, I'm sure you have an opinion. Most people have an opinion. I have an opinion. You have an opinion. But your opinion, my opinion, doesn't matter. You might think loud music is terrible. I might like it all night long. It doesn't matter what we think. It matters what these 9 members of the Supreme Court think. When they decide, it's final. So obviously there are 9, so there can never be a tie. But these 9 individuals need to know the Constitution, and they need to know how to interpret it. Because the law I gave you is a fairly simple example. But let's say that the state of Colorado bans assault rifles. Well, does that violate the Second Amendment to the Constitution? Of course, someone would have to challenge that Colorado law in court and work their way all the way to the Supreme Court, assuming that the Supreme Court would hear the case. Then they would decide whether or not assault rifles are protected by the Constitution. And whatever they decide, that is the decision that the country has to live with. You might disagree with it. You might think it's the greatest decision ever. Our opinions don't matter. So their decision on a variety of social issues really do kind of shape society, whether we're talking about guns or punishment, how we punish criminals, every aspect of society that you can think of. Voting, they handle it all, making sure that the Constitution is interpreted correctly. So the U.S. Supreme Court, remember, they're at the top of all the federal courts. There are hundreds of other judges appointed by the president. But again, these are the 9 most important because they have final say on all federal issues. So they're appointed by the president. Hey, why would they be appointed by the president? Well, that's what the Constitution says. So the President of the United States appoints someone to be on the Supreme Court. They would be confirmed by the Senate. And if they are confirmed, meaning the Senate okays it, then they are on the Supreme Court for life, just like all the other federal judges. If the President appoints someone to be on a circuit court or district court in Cincinnati, Ohio, that person is on that court for the rest of their life, or unless they make a decision to resign or retire, or they're in trouble with the law. But for the most part, they'll serve for 30 or 40 years. So this is a lifetime appointment. So think about why the Founding Fathers might have included it and built it in this way, or made this the rule, probably most likely to avoid these judges having to worry about being reelected, having to remain popular, having to always try to think about, okay, I guess I got to get elected in a couple years. I should probably rule this way or that way. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not political, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later in this talk, but they don't have to worry about being elected. Now, all other judges, for example, in Ohio, who serve as county judges or state judges, these are all voted on by the voters, but federal judges, those in the federal courts and on the Supreme Court, they're appointed and confirmed by the Senate. And again, they have the final say on all issues. So these 9 justices in total, again, this could be changed by the Congress, but it hasn't been changed since 1869, so most likely 9 members will be the number that will be on the Supreme Court for many years to come. And of these 9, the 8 are referred to as associate justices, and the one that's mentioned in the Constitution, the one officer of the Supreme Court, is known as the Chief Justice of the United States of America. Currently, his name is John Roberts. And John Roberts will be Chief Justice of the United States of America for 30 years, 40 years. It just depends. He was appointed when he was fairly young, in his 50s. And so if he works until he's in his 80s, that's 30 years or so of John Roberts being the leader. Now, he only gets 1 vote. He's 1 vote, the way that everyone else gets 1 vote. But he is mentioned in the Constitution. You might consider him like the first among equals. And he does have certain ceremonial powers that we'll talk about throughout this course. For example, if the president gets sworn in as oath of office on January 20th, it's the Chief Justice of the United States that swears the president in. He also would preside in case of presidential impeachment. So there are certain things that the Chief Justice is in charge of. But again, he only gets 1 vote, and everyone else gets 1 vote as well. but technically he's referred to as the Chief Justice. All the others are referred to as the Associate Justices. Now, one other thing that's important to think about is a lot of people will call him the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but that's not really his title. His official title is the Chief Justice of the United States of America. He's on the same level as the President of the United States of America. They are to be considered equal. But of course, most people in America probably don't know who John Roberts is, but now you do. So all members of the Supreme Court are appointed by the President, and when John Roberts was appointed, he was picked by President George W. Bush to be the Chief Justice when the current Chief Justice at the time passed away and died. So John Roberts had become the Chief Justice of the United States. So if you ever meet him, you should refer to him as the Chief Justice of the United States. So let's talk about how these members of the Supreme Court are political. Remember, they don't have to run for election. They're there for their entire lives, but that doesn't mean that they're not political, right? They're in politics and government, so they do have to listen to some extent to the people of the country. But it all really kind of boils down to who appoints you to be on the Supreme Court. So of the 9 people on the Supreme Court, the breakdown currently is about 6 of them have been appointed by a conservative Republican, meaning, remember our syrup talk, very little syrup. They don't want a lot of government. They see government a certain way. They view the Constitution a certain way. So 6 of the 9 have been put on there by Republican. The other 3 were put on there by a Democrat. So while these members of the Supreme Court don't run for election, they are, in a certain extent, they think the way that the president who put them on there. So like if you were to think about President Barack Obama, for example, he had a chance to put, I think, 2 people on the Supreme Court. Long after Barack Obama is not president, right? He can only be president for 8 years. Long after he's gone and out of the White House, retired, he has been able to put people on the Supreme Court who think like him. In other words, it's part of his legacy. It's his fingerprints that are all over the Supreme Court. Now, there are 2 people of the 9 that think like Barack Obama, who tend to be a little more liberal, want government involved, think the government can fix a lot of the problems of the country. They tend to see the Constitution a certain way. Donald Trump, when he was president, which is quite extraordinary, he was only president for 4 years, and yet, at least at the time of this recording or making of this video, he was able to put 3 people on the Supreme Court. So you can see, he in this picture, I like it because it shows that he knows that long after he's gone, he will have put people on the Supreme Court who think like he does. And it's a way to have a legacy, really, on the Supreme Court. And all these presidents, they want that. They want to be able to say, well, I'm not president anymore, but I have people in the Supreme Court who think the way that I do. Most presidents get at least to put 1 person on the Supreme Court. Donald Trump was extraordinary with 3 in 4 years. Some presidents don't get to put any on. Jimmy Carter, who was president from 1977 to 1981, did not get a chance to put anyone on the Supreme Court. But if we look at the Supreme Court today, it's a 6-3 split. There are the red dots indicate those who were appointed by Republican presidents, and the blue dots represent those that have been appointed by Democratic presidents. And we see the Chief Justice, John Roberts, in the middle. He was appointed by a Republican president, but again, he has no more say in the Supreme Court than any other one else. They all get 1 vote. And throughout this course, you'll be seeing court cases where you'll read someone versus someone, and the decision will be anywhere from 9-0 to 5-4 or 6-3. It just shows you the split of how these justices vote. So sometimes it'll be a 6-3, sometimes 5-4, sometimes a 9-0 if it's some major issue that they all agree on. But it's very rare that it'll be that one-sided. It's usually pretty close, given that the country is relatively divided.